Project 327. 3 trails, 2 poles, and 7 summits.
3 trails are the Triple Crown of U.S. hiking. 2 poles are the North and South Pole. 7 is the 7 summits. As a veteran, there's still a lot of things that you carry with you day to day. Don't get stage 4 frostbite. It's not fun. Essentially in the middle of a war zone. There's like a 7,000 foot drop on that side and a 9,000 foot drop on that side. Push the I believe button. Keep paying it forward, and eventually it's going to play out for you.
If there was one thing the world was asking for, it was for one more podcast about CrossFit. Well, here we are anyways. This is the Silverback Media Podcast, where we share the stories of the everyday CrossFitter, so that more people are encouraged and empowered to try it themselves. Here's your host and everyday CrossFitter, Marco Mejia.
What is happening, Silverback Media crew? Welcome back to the Silverback Media Podcast. My name is Marco Mejia. I'm a CrossFit Level 2 coach in Phoenix, Arizona, and I am your host here on the show. My guest on the show this week is David Phillips. Now, it's not often that you get to talk to somebody that's trying to do something that literally nobody in documented history has done before, but that's the opportunity that I get today. David retired from the U.S. Navy after a 25-year career and is now in the middle of completing what he calls Project 327, or the Grand Explorer's Crown. In this episode, we'll talk about exactly what Project 327 is and what he's trying to accomplish. This project is something that David set out to do to help disabled veterans through the Disabled American Veterans Organization, to raise funds for that organization and help give back to the veteran community. Now, this isn't a traditional CrossFit story like I typically bring you, but David does talk through his training, which is very CrossFit-like. So we talk through his training, how it translates to his success in his trails and his mountaineering. We also talk about the power of belief in yourself and in what you're trying to accomplish, and in the power of preparation for any situation that you may come across. I'll put a link to David's website in the show notes here. The website is www.grandexplorerscrown.com. On that site, you can follow along with his progress and his journey over the course of this project. You can also find merch on there, and there are links directly to support and donate to the Disabled American Veterans Organization. So that website will be in the show notes. Go check that out. Now, before we get to that conversation with David, remember to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify, or if you're watching us on YouTube. You know what? While you're at it, just go ahead and do it across all three. Why not? You're already here. And with that being said, that's 25 down, 10,000 to go. And let's go talk to David. All right, David Phillips, thank you for joining the show. Appreciate it. You know, we got connected and we were just chatting a little bit about it through Matt Howell, who's been a guest on the podcast as well. And you're an experienced climber in your own right, as Matt is as well. So it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, same. Thanks for having me on, Mark. Looking forward to it.
So first thing, and this is more just a curiosity question. So I was going through the website for Project 327, which we'll get into here in a minute. It said that your nickname was Ghost. I'm curious, is that like a military nickname? Is that something that stuck for a while?
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw my cup here. It's from Halloween.
Oh, there you go.
It's all ghosts from. Yeah, so right as I was transitioning out of the Navy after 25 years, I started the Appalachian Trail. While I was still on my terminal leave, I had about 2 months of leave to burn, and so when you're a hiker, you get a trail name, and that's like what you go by. You introduce yourself as whatever it is. And but it's not it's like a pilot's call sign. You don't get to name yourself. Somebody else has to give it to you. You have to earn it, essentially. So two friends, one that I met, a friend of a friend, and then somebody I've known for quite a long time, ended up giving me the trail name Ghost, because after my buddy that I started with the trail with, he had to leave after about 80 miles, had some medical stuff come up. And so I was just on my own, and I would get up like at the crack of dawn, leave camp, pack up real quick, leave, and then show up to the next camp, 25, 30 miles later, right at dusk, and kind of ghost in at night, So like I was always moving in front of people because you have this like trail bubble of people you're around, but I was moving so quickly and on my own that I would just kind of ghost in and out of places and never see the same people 2 days in a row. So it just kind of stuck. And
Nice.
So now it's my trail name. I'm starting the Pacific Crest Trail here in a couple months. And so that'll carry on through the next couple hikes. And fortunately, like for me, some trail names aren't super unique. I found out over the course of my hike and on AT, there were a couple other ghosts, but fortunately for me, those dudes dropped out, so I was the only ghost left standing. So
You're the last ghost left, right?
yeah,
It's kind of like a Highlander situation, right? Like there can only be
exactly.
one ghost.
Yeah, they gave up and went home, and I carried on through from Georgia to Maine. So yeah.
There you go. Oh my goodness. All right. So and that's a good transition into Project 327, right? Which, that's you're I think you're right in the middle of essentially,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Everest
It's
Everest was the dead center.
the dead center. Okay, and it's three trails, two poles, and seven summits, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So give just for for listeners who haven't heard it, right? What are the three trails, the two poles, the seven summits that you're aiming to accomplish? Like kind of a quick overview of what you're striving to achieve.
Okay. Yeah. The three trails are the Triple Crown of U.S. hiking. I've already done the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. That's about 2,200 miles straight. I do the Pacific Crest Trail. I just got my approval yesterday for my start date. So that's about
Nice.
2,600 miles from the border of Mexico up to the border of Canada on the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington on through. I'll do a,
Wow.
traditional NOBO or northbound hike. And then in 2027, I'll do the Continental Divide Trail. And that's again from the Mexican border up to Canada, but up through the Continental Divide through like Colorado and Wyoming in that area.
Oh, cool.
And that's
Okay.
about 3,200 miles. So all in, it's about 9,000 miles straight of hiking. And then the two poles are the North and South Pole, and I'll do those in conjunction with some other things. So like the South Pole, I was originally going to try to do it this January, but with the frost damage of my feet still kind of recovering, I'm going to kick on to next year. But I'll do the South Pole in conjunction with one of the other seven summits. So the seven is the seven summits. I've already done five. So North America, South America, Africa, Asia, and Australasia. So just have the South Pole there at Mount Vinson, and then Europe, which is actually in Russia. So that's kind of a no go right now because of international issues. And I also, because of those international issues, have to go through Russia to get to the North Pole. So those two, Mount Elbrus and the North Pole, are kind of, waiting for everything to clear through at some point. So those will be farther down the road. But right now, I'm at 6 of the 12 overall objectives. I've done one trail and 5 summits. So yeah.
Nice. That's incredible. And I think I saw it I think I saw it on your website that nobody has completed all of those, right? Maybe there are some people that have done it, whether it's the three trails or the seven summit, but nobody has done all of these, correct?
Right. Yeah. There's what I found when I was trying to put together a project for my post military career. I just gotten back from Afghanistan, and I was kind of doing some research. And I know a lot of hikers, which is cool, but it's a completely different discipline than like hardcore mountaineers, and even then, way different from polar explorers. So there's something called the Explorers Grand Slam, where you do the seven summits and the North and South Poles, and that's a thing, but only like 53 people had done it. And I know a couple of those people that I've climbed with. So I'm like, okay, I know what it takes to do that because I've met and climbed with those people. And I know some through hikers, but then doing research, nobody does both because dirtbag hikers are one world and dirtbag mountaineers, are something else. And polar explorers are just nuts. So those worlds don't overlap at all, or very rarely. And so yeah, I came up with it. So the Grand Explorer's Crown, Project 327, is kind of a mashing together the Triple Crown of hiking and the Explorer's Grand Slam of the seven summits and two poles together.
Oh my goodness. So I couldn't help but wonder as I was going through it, and I came across that. I'm happy I found that, right? When you first thought of the idea of actually going for it and doing all these, right? Because there's not many opportunities that people have to do something that nobody's ever done before, right? So I got to imagine the thought came to you, and then maybe you brought it up to somebody close to you, and you were like, I think I have this idea. Like, what was that reaction from whoever that person was?
So my first one was like, as I'm doing the research, like, please don't let there be somebody. Like, if I already, I came across this thing and I'm researching all the names and like, okay, at least as far as the internet shows, those worlds don't overlap. Like, okay, great. I have an original idea. And then I was kind of bringing it up to a friend of mine, the guy that I ended up starting the Appalachian Trail with. And he was like, yeah, man, just do it. Like, we only get one turn around the sun. He had already done the Pacific Crest. I think at that point, he had tried twice and failed twice and got it on his third try. And so he's a hardcore hiker, but like not comfortable in the mountains in snow and ice and all that. And so he was just like, yeah, man, just go for it. Because, I already knew a couple people that were badasses that had done some or all of the Explorers Grand Slam. Again, 53 people on the entire planet. I'm not talking about Americans. I'm talking about Korea, Germany, Japan, like right, everyone. And so I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then now that I've gone farther into that world, like last year was in Indonesia for Carson's Pyramid, which is the highest in Australasia. And then, of course, on Everest in the spring here, I met a couple people that were finishing their seventh summit or had already done quite a few. I was on the top of Mount Carson's with somebody that was her last of the seven summits and was there, as
Cool.
she was able to close out that journey because the mountain had been closed for 5 years because of political unrest. And
Mm.
so, like, I finally realized I don't know if you can see behind me, I have a framed quote of "Man in the Arena"
Oh
by
yeah.
like Teddy Roosevelt. So I keep that on the wall. And I just realized, like, for some of these things, I may not be setting like the newest, fastest route or opening a new mountain, but I'm still able to be in the same arena as all these other people that I look up to, or that are badasses in their own rights. And was like, yeah, I feel like I can do this, and this is kind of what I'm pulled towards doing. In transition between my military career and then where I'm going next after all the project is done.
That's incredible. And I, you brought up that being at the top of, you said it was Carson's Pyramid
Mhm.
in Australasia, and being there with somebody who was finishing their seventh summit, right? I mean, could you get a sense of what that emotion was for that person
Oh yeah,
in that moment?
yeah. I mean, for her, it was years and years coming, and it went. And when you're with some of these people, like she was uh, the first of her country, like the first Mexican woman, and then the first woman from this country, or the first man from their representative country, right? Like these people are still putting up firsts, maybe not in the world, but for representing their people, their culture, what have you. And so it's huge. And then actually happened to run into one of them. We were down in Pico de Orizaba in Mexico this spring before Everest, just kind of like a trial run, and just ran into her like on the side of the mountain as she was there with some other groups. And so like the mountaineering world is yeah, it's worldwide, but it's so small. Like you're like 1 degree of separation from anybody, you know.
Oh my goodness, that's and what is some like seeing somebody like they're the first, first woman from Mexico, right? And you're in the middle of this journey yourself to be the first person documented, right? To have done all of these things. Like what kind of a boost is seeing somebody like that accomplish or finish that journey
Yeah.
give for you while you're in the
Like
middle of it?
I think it just shows that I think a lot of us maybe have you grew up watching the Olympics, right? You grew up watching NFL or NBA or something. Like I grew up in some other different sports, but I was never going to be, a Ronaldo. I was never going to be a Tony Hawk. Like that's just not in the cards. But I can still compete at the top level.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to see it that way, it's not really competing. Mountaineering is kind of a different thing, but you're still doing very extreme physical things with people that are at the top of their game, and you can still, I was super stoked for them with their respective, wins there, and just it's amazing to see just how real it is and how it is accessible. It's crazy, right? But when I say it's accessible, like I came from East Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains, not the Himalaya, right? And so it's accessible in the sense that if you just kind of stumble into it, you can end up on the top of Everest, with enough, determination and stubbornness and what have you. So yeah.
That's incredible, and I'm happy you bring up like your upbringing, right? So you grew up in East Tennessee. You said you played sports as a kid, like yeah. So give me a sense of like what a young David was getting into sports wise. Were you playing a wide variety? Were you running around getting into trouble in the mountains? Like what was it? What were you like
Oh,
growing up?
Yeah. So just other dirtbag sports, like, so I grew up like playing soccer
Mm.
as a kid until I was about 13, and then just gave all that up and started skateboarding. It was like when skateboarding died in the early 90s, like big pants
Mhm.
and all that kind of stuff, and punk rockers. And yeah, so I skateboarded for about 20 years until my back was just like, no, man, you're done. You're in your late 30s,
Oh.
early 40s. We're not doing this shit anymore. Um, that's when I kind of made a turn towards trail running and mountaineering, because it's still, very demanding. But skateboarding, bouncing off concrete at 47 is not super fun anymore. So
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
sure there's
but it was
a
always like
couple falls in there at the end where you hit something and you're like, "Ooh, yeah, nope, that's going to take a little bit longer to stand up from that one."
yeah, yeah, taking falls on the trail on trail runs is less fun now at 47 than it was at 35, so yeah, try to maintain. But yeah, so I grew up, playing team sports, playing, like cul-de-sac baseball, or throwing football around or whatever, but not into like big school team sports, because once it got too competitive, it was just not super fun for me anymore, because I was never going to be on a college team, or playing for MLS or anything like that. So I started skateboarding. So, but I think that was a key for me, especially now, like post injury, all that like micro balance and micro movement kind of stuff that you find in skateboarding, and also a high pain tolerance, because you got to be able to take some slams and really kind of work through some things as a skateboarder if you're doing it in any kind of capacity. I was a street skateboarder, so yeah, the concrete is unforgiving. I've got scars all over, and so that kind of like just grinding through and pain tolerance definitely translated into mountain sports.
I'm sure, and especially, I mean, I'm sure with skateboarding, right? Learning new tricks, new skills, whatever the case is, right? New ways to ride. And I mean, there's a lot of trial and error there. And the error, like you said, it's gonna come with some hurt.
Oh yeah,
Like you're gonna hit
yeah,
some things
yeah.
that you
I mean,
didn't
same
want to
way,
hit.
like, yeah, as a rock climber and boulderer, yeah, it's trial by fire, and you're hoping that you're putting that line together the right way. Otherwise, there's a certain amount of pain involved, if things don't go your way. So yeah,
And then, so you'd mentioned that you've been in or you were in the military for you had 25 years in the military. Yeah, which
25 years.
25 years. Okay, which first off, thank you for your service. And so that your time in the military may have coincided with some of your skateboarding time, if I've got that timeline right.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I essentially like went into the Navy because I spent probably too much time skateboarding on campus and not as much time studying. And I was just like, man, I don't want to spend, the next essentially decade in school, because I was going to change
Mm.
majors and start all over and all this mess. And I was just like, they're going to give me like a real skill and different bonuses and so on. And then this is all pre 9/11, and then after 9/11, the determination to serve changed, and I spent a lot of time in the Middle East and in some other conflict areas. But yeah, the skateboarding kind of went throughout that. I was still skating like when I lived on the North Shore of Hawaii. I've got one of the paintings behind me is of one of the bowls up there on the North
Oh,
Shore.
nice.
Um, but yeah, still kept skateboarding. But at some point, it was just like, dude, I can't take slams anymore and just bounce
Yeah.
off the street. So I kind of transitioned from skateboarding to trail running, which
Mm.
also has a lot of pain involved. We spend a lot of time in the pain cave on a lot of my long runs here.
Yeah, well, especially through trails. How did you come across trail running? Was that something you had been interested in before, or was it
I,
did someone invite you out on a run and you're like, hey, this is actually kind of cool and less painful than hitting the concrete?
Yeah. Well, it kind of came about like happenstance. I was getting into mountain biking, and I was getting ready to go on a deployment, and I was mountain biking and ended up crossing my handlebars and going up over the bars and
Ooh,
almost breaking my clavicle. And I was just like, man, I can't keep doing this, because at some point I'm going to get messed up bad. But
yeah,
the same trails I would see trail runners on. We're like, well, let me slow this down. If I fall on the rocks and dirt and whatever at foot speed, it's way different than on a mountain bike, right? And so,
mm,
yeah, there's still consequences, but they're not like I'm going to end up in traction consequences.
Yeah, right. It's like I'll take a spill, catch some scrapes and things. And yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure you can, take some nasty spills on a trail, but
Yeah.
the speed difference between a mountain bike or a skateboard versus running on a trail probably helps that out a decent
Yeah.
amount.
I was actually telling my wife this last weekend. So last Saturday was the last ultra that we did as a
Mm.
race. And I was like, I think this is the first race I've never like left any blood or skin on the trail. Because like pretty much any race, at some point we call them land sharks. You're gonna hit a rock or a root and just like Superman out on trail. And so I was like, damn, I think this is the first race I didn't leave anything behind. So things are looking up.
That's it. Yeah, it's a good sign, right? Halfway through your project, and now things are looking up, right? So, at what point in the course over the course of that did focusing on your fitness and exercise become a piece of it? I mean, skateboarding's pretty physically demanding, but it's not necessarily something that you think about and you're like, oh yeah, well, let me go get in the gym to get better at skateboarding, right? I'm sure the military probably had had some pieces for that. But at what point did that start to become a focus for you? Hey, quick interruption from me. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you are, I have a favor to ask of you. The main way that this thing can continue to spread is through word of mouth. So if you're enjoying this episode, send it to someone or share it with someone that may benefit from it or enjoy it as well. Leave a comment, drop a 5-star review, follow the show, share about it on social media. That's the main way that we can help get this message out to others so we can continue to spread this, okay? I'd really appreciate it if you do that. And now let's get back to the show.
Yeah, so I didn't run at all until I joined the Navy. As a skateboarder, I would only run like running from the cops on campus, that kind of thing, and go hide in the bushes. But yeah, I didn't run at all. But then, like after 9/11, I started working a bunch of different stuff that required just for my own like mental sanity and kind of a break away from that world to go for a run. And I thought at one point like 5 miles, that's the farthest I'm ever going to go. It hurt. Like this is bullshit. I don't understand how people can do this. I never thought about a half or a full marathon, much less like the ultras and any of that mess. But I just kind of eased into it. But it got to a point where like, damn, like running 26 miles on concrete just messes your joints up and it hurts. And I found like going trail running, I could do the same distance and then pop out of bed the next day or two just fine, because you're running on like
Nice.
pine or that kind of and dirt. And so it's just a lot more forgiving. Maybe not the falls. The falls don't still hurt, but like just overall course of the race, I can run 31 miles, get up the next day and go to work and be fine by and large.
Oh, cool.
So, and it became more of like a pressure valve for me, as things got crazier in the world and crazier at work, as I got more senior in the military, that was like my out. I could go for a long run on Saturday, Sunday with friend and just disappear into the woods for a while and kind of like reset because
No.
mountaineering is that other thing for me. But I was living on the East Coast in Georgia, and kind of closer to the ocean, and there's no mountains there. And so trail running was kind of like my way to get away from it all. Same. Even now in Texas, I live here in San Antonio, and yeah, there's no mountains anywhere for like 7 hours. And so, but I right outside my back gate, I've got about 1,000 acres out my back door here for a city park, all through the trees, so I can just go out and trail run for 10 miles straight without repeating anything. And that's still kind of like if I just need to go and work through some things, the trail is the place I go to. Kind of like, a lot of CrossFitters, same kind of mentality, going to the gym and lifting heavy things and putting it back down, right? So,
Yeah, that's exactly what was repeating in my head, right? It's like it's that same benefit of just being able to kind of like I hate to use the word escape, but I feel like that's the
yeah,
one of the more appropriate ones, right? It's like you just can get away from everything for a
yeah.
little bit,
I,
right?
I see it as like just a way to like scrub it out of your system. And I did a lifting session last night. So it was the same kind of thing. Like, I understand I was never a gym rat until I got into like heavy mountaineering, but I understand why. Like that is your way out. Just put the headphones on and disappear for an hour or two and just kind of work it out of your system.
Yeah, it's like I think that's I've never really been gotten into like meditation necessarily. I feel like that's one of the things that people are trying to get from out of meditation, right? Is just like this even keel space of like not allowing all the things throughout the day, right? Just the life stuff to flood into your head, right? Like, oh, I got to get this from the grocery store. And oh crap, I have this thing left on my to-do list from work. And oh, that thing around the house broke, right? And just being able to silence all that and quiet all that for a little bit of time to just breathe and be like, okay, all right, things are good. And I feel like that's where, a long trail run, it's hard to really think about much of anything else
Yeah, you can't.
because,
Yeah.
yeah.
I kind of naturally gravitated towards these sports, rock climbing, mountaineering, trail running, through hiking, that you have to stay right there in that moment. Same as lifting. You're working on your form. You've got to stay right here, right in front of you, not left, right. You're not worrying about the kids or any of that stuff. You're staying right there. But I think that is my zen. I was in South Korea during COVID outbreak, and so I would go every weekend to go hike a different national park, and there would be all these like Buddhist temples. And like, there's no difference between me being out on those trails doing like a 10, 15 mile hike day and the monks inside the temple doing the same thing. Like, we're after the same thing. It's just the way you get at it.
Oh yeah, that's a great way to put it, right? It's like you were, yeah, striving towards the same goal, if you want to call it that, right? Yeah, just find using different ways to get there. Oh man, but yeah, I love that component of it, right? I do have one kind of off the wall question for you about the because you mentioned you joined the military pre 9/11 and
Yep.
then we're in there around that. When 9/11 happened, what was that like? Describe like what was that day like for you? I mean, being in the military, that's I was really small. Like I remember just being like, okay, I guess do we go to school today, right? Like I was school age at that time, right? So it was probably a very different experience for you. I'm curious what that day was like for you.
Yeah, I was already in out of my initial schooling into my first duty station.
Hmm.
And we lived in the DC metro area. And so we lived like, my house was right underneath the BWI flight path. And
Oh
so every
wow.
day, there's planes skimming my rooftop. And they sent us home from work, and they were just like, go home. Like, we'll let you know when to come back. But essentially, like, nothing like that had ever happened, where they just send the entire workforce home and like, we'll call you back when we need you. And then my wife at the time was doing a training overseas in Cairo in Egypt, and so she got locked down in place. And so I was at home with my toddler, and there's no planes in the sky, and we're not at work, and my spouse was overseas, and it was just like, you could feel the sense of the tidal wave coming, of what was going to happen. And sure enough, that was essentially the next 23 years or so of my life. Spent a lot of time over there, and actually came up with a lot of the project components while I was in Afghanistan and so on. So like, yeah, that kind of defined the rest of my adult life until I stopped service. And so yeah, it was a huge game changer for my life and for my kids, and so on and so forth. So yeah.
Sounds like such an eerie
Mhm.
feeling. Like I feel like I was there, and like yeah, just the way you described it of like having almost being comfortable with like, all right, the sound of planes going over your house, and it's just like on a day it's just like nope, quiet.
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, along with everything else that happened that day, that was probably just such a I don't tense, feels like the inappropriate word, um situation. So thanks for sharing that. I mean, I know it's kind of like off the wall in terms of
Oh
what we're
no, I
talking
mean,
about, but
it
I was just
it it
curious.
it, it defined, the rest of my career, much less
Mhm.
like the trajectory of my life. So yeah, it was a huge thing for not just my generation, but me specifically.
Goodness gracious. And then okay, so then you said that, over the course of your time in the Middle East, right, on whether it be on deployment, you started coming up with some of the ideas for the project that you're on now. When did you start to get seriously into mountaineering?
So in 2011, the Navy sent me out to training in Whidbey Island in Washington. So
Okay.
it's kind of like northwest, right there on the strait. You're right across the Olympic Peninsula. But when
Yeah.
you fly into Seattle, you fly right over Mount Rainier, and
Okay.
then from base there in Whidbey, you can see the Olympic Peninsula and all the mountains out there, which is its own mountain range, and then you can see Mount Baker on a good day. And so
Okay.
Northern Cascades are right there, the Olympics. And I would go on the weekends to like go down to Rainier or Baker, Mount St. Helens. And I'd never seen like real ass mountains like that. Like Tennessee mountains are like foothills, maybe it snows, maybe it doesn't, but those aren't real mountains in the grand scheme of like an entire mountain range that covers the whole state and, up to 14,000 feet. So I went out, and spend a little bit of time in the snow on Baker and Rainier. And I'm like, I got to come back and do this, man. I've never done anything or seen anything. I don't know any mountaineers, but I'm going to do this. And
Yeah.
so, like the next summer, like essentially the next 4 summers, I went back to Washington and climbed all around and kept going back to Washington. I had property that actually looked at Mount Rainier for quite a while that I just
Cool.
sold last year to help pay for Everest. And so, like, we're still talking about pulling chocks and moving to Washington here in a couple years so that we can be closer to big mountains. Because yeah,
Oh, awesome.
it's just a draw. Like you feel that magnetism, like, hey, come climb me. You should be doing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I never had that before. And so every year, and again, that was kind of like my release valve. You get 30 days off a year in the military, whether you can use them or not. And I was like,
Mm.
I would try to go do a new mountain at least once or twice a year. And
Right.
it kind of got to the point where, at least with a project, like the Navy's not going to give me 2 months off to go to Everest. It's not going to let me go to Indonesia, essentially in the middle of a war zone, to go climb, Carson's Pyramid. It was the first time the mountain been open in 5 years because they were having a civil war. Like that would never happen if I was still active duty. Um,
Right.
and so, yeah, I realized like, A, for my own like mental health, I need to move beyond the service, but
Mm.
also for me to continue the project, they're not going to let me take off 5 months to hike that Appalachian Trail. Like I need to
Yeah.
kind of move on and get to what I want to do at some point. And so,
Gotcha.
yeah, mountaineering was always like the central pillar there of let me keep doing this and get better and better and do more glacier work and then go to the Andes and then go to Denali and then kind of spread out from there. So
Oh, wow.
Everest was never like a goal. We had talked about it just tangentially, like, hey, yeah, sure. Like it's like you talk about, competing at the games actual, next to Matt Frazier or somebody. Like, yeah, sure. Well, yeah, that'll happen someday. Um, but eventually, like you meet enough of those people, you're like, oh, that's me. Like I can do that, with enough determination and hopefully I don't get injured and, the right training plan and all that kind of stuff and eventually like, oh, that's me, and so just kind of chipped away at it over about 15 years. And most of it, like physical prep is a huge part, but it's maybe 30%. I don't know how much Matt talked about it, but especially as we get older as aging athletes, um, Matt and I were the oldest guys on the trip, on summit day. And, it's a different ball game for us than it is for the 28-year-old dude, that is in his prime. And so, you know, trying to maintain and do all the things that we need to do to not only get to the mountain, but get there safely and not get injured and continue on. Everybody has that, but I feel like the older you get, the more you have to calculate that into your training regimen and so on. So the way I've trained for these big mountains has changed dramatically since I just first started, 15 years ago. Back then, I could just do weights and do body weight stuff, crunches, squats, lunges, those kind of things, body weight. And then I got into a very heavy CrossFit adjacent program that was like mountain specific and sports specific to help build me up for these big expeditions.
Yeah. No, and we talked we definitely talked a little bit about it when I talked to Matt. One of the things that I don't think I had a great appreciation for was, and this plays into the physical component too, is that it's not just the climb up, right? You like once you summit, what goes, as the old saying goes, right? What goes up must come down. Like you still got to have enough left in the tank to get down off the mountain too, which I didn't have a great appreciation for the fact of like, oh yeah, there's not just like an elevator to the bottom once you hit that point, right? So you've got to be in the physical condition to get there and still be able to like keep your head on straight and keep your head on tight enough to be like, all right, like we got to focus and get back down this mountain too.
Yeah. So like for me, and Matt finished ahead of me on Everest, so clearly his training paid out, better than mine did.
Do CrossFit, David. No.
Yeah, yeah, dude. Um, I was gassed, man. So for example, like you were talking about, it took me 12 hours to get to the summit. There were a lot of people, just same summit Congo line that Matt and I were in. He was like a couple people in front of me. Um, so it took 12 hours to get to the summit, but then it took me another 15 to get back down to Camp 2. And
Cool.
so yeah, the stretch is getting down. It's not getting up to the top. So many people just gas out and tap out, figuratively or literally, because we went across a couple bodies because they didn't have enough in the tank. They had enough to get to the top, and they're like, I'm good. My Sherpa will get me back down, but you're putting another person's life in danger, or other teammates in danger. And, if you fail at 29,000 feet, there's no coming back. Like, you have to make your way down under your own steam to a certain point. And so it's always about having enough in the tank and knowing yourself well enough to go into that zone, which is, Matt talked to, I know listening to him, and I know through my own training, like you train in that zone so often, especially as a trail runner, you train when you're at like that 80% threshold and just stay right there at like zone 3, because that's where you have to tap back into when things are down.
And you got to be able to like hold that spot for a long. You just said that summiting Everest and getting back down to Camp 2 is a 27-hour stretch, 12
Yeah,
hours to the summit,
27.
15 hours on the way back.
Yeah,
Like that's a
longest day
long.
ever. Yeah.
no,
Yeah,
no kidding,
we
right?
start we start in the dark. The sun comes up, the sun goes down again, and it's still dark. Like you're still climbing. Yeah,
Who said that everybody gets the same 24 hours? You got a 27 hours.
yeah. It was rough. And then yeah, getting into the tent there at Camp 2, and Matt's sitting there, and everybody just looks hammered. But some of us are
I
more
can
hammered
imagine.
than others. One of our other teammates come in, and he's just like stumbling hammered. And so yeah,
Goodness
you
gracious.
you've got to train in that zone and know what that feels like to know where your edge is.
What was the first experience you had, once you started really leaning into the mountaineering aspect of like feeling that feeling like getting close to the summit and be like, oh wow, this is different. Like I need to adjust my training or plan differently or, whatever the case may be. But what was your first experience that you really felt that difference?
Yeah, so I did 3 big mountains in a row when I started to first go towards some of the seven. I never purposely was aiming at the seven summits. I climbed a lot in Washington and some other areas, but then I was like, okay, let me try some of these out. And so it was Aconcagua, which is the highest in the Andes in South America, just shy of 23,000 feet. Um, and yeah, carrying a big pack, like upwards of 65, 70 pounds, at 18, 20,000 feet, as you get up to high camp. And it was like, oh, what I've been doing is not going to cut it. And
Yeah.
so the next year after that, I went to Denali up in Alaska, and same kind of thing. Like that's when I first got into Mountain Tactical Institute,
Mm.
and Rob Shaw's team that had a Denali specific program, that is very, very CrossFit esque in all respects. 2 a days, lots of running, body weights, kettlebells, free weights, Olympic barbell, so on. And then we got weathered out, because of real nasty weather on Denali. Denali's horrendous and infamous for terrible weather. So we got pushed down, and I went back the next year and trained even harder that next year, because you're carrying maybe a 60, 65 pound pack, and then another 60, 65 in a sled behind you that you're dragging up the side of the mountain. And so
Oh boy.
yeah, it
Wow.
was it was a completely game changing, mentality that had to, like, if I want to actually make it to the summit, you have to
Mm.
do, hit all the marks each and every day leading up to the summit. There's no easy day, there's no day off. Even on our rest days, we were still working on, how to clip in, how to do ice work, how to, make snow walls in 14 camp, like all these kind of things. So your rest day is not a down day. You're still doing stuff around camp, and just realize like, oh, I need way more knowledge of how to operate in the mountains, and also I need to be a lot bigger. So like for Everest, I put on almost 30 pounds of muscle. I went and trained with starting strength for about 6 months, because I'd never done any pure Olympic barbell lifting to be able to have a stronger chassis, leading up to a big mountain. My first 8,000 meter peak. Um, and so, yeah, really had to completely reframe, like, I'm not just a trail runner anymore. I have to have all these other disciplines, in my pocket to be able to get up these big mountains, because you're going so far in the tank every day, especially like I said there on summit day. You have to kind of lean on whatever you can to be able to get to that point.
And I'm sure having it yeah, I'm sure having the background of trail running from a physical perspective helped a ton, right? Just in terms of engine cardio, built like layering the strength component on top of it, because then you just have a bigger, stronger engine that
Right.
you can push for longer, right? Um, I'm curious how the trail running like that, just long grind of a trail run over and over. Do you feel like that helped you from like when you're working your way up a mountain, just the day-to-day grind and mental discipline of like, all right, we got to, shut it down and wake back up the next day and do it all over again. Like,
Yeah.
it is a
I mean,
little bit
that,
of Groundhog Day working your way up a
yeah.
mountain, right? So to speak.
Yeah, I mean that rise and grind. And same thing with like my military background. Like it's gonna suck yesterday, it's gonna suck today, it'll probably suck tomorrow. Like it's just this is just what it is, man. You can either go with it and roll with it, or just complain or whatever. And so whether it was a trail running, like yeah, it's just gonna hurt. I'm not injured, but it's gonna suck. And so there's a lot of that. Like, and I think Matt talked about a little bit, like going up through the ice fall. You're making your way up through this ice maze, at altitude and climbing up steep ice walls, having to kick in with your crampons and ascend up with your Jumars, and it's extremely physically challenging. Much less layer on the fact that you're at like 19, 20,000 feet, and so you have to have the cardio engine, but also the basic musculature. I saw people that had to be literally dragged up the wall by their Sherpas because they just didn't have the baseline strength
Strength.
to
Oh,
clip their way up the wall. Some places had a ladder and you can just hand over hand like any other ladder, but some of them you had to literally, you have your ascender in one of your hands that you're pulling up, and you're essentially almost doing a pull up and
yeah.
pulling yourself up the whole way. And you have to have that baseline strength, and then especially when you're say going up the let's say face, you started about 23,000 feet up to about 26,000 feet. So that 3,000 foot block, you're at like a 45 up to 55-degree angle, and it's just blasting your calves and quads. And, there's no way around that. You just got to muscle your way through a lot of it. So,
And I mean, the mental focus to stay like kind of like what we were talking about, to stay in the game. I mean, I think I saw one of the, going through your website, you have some of the other interviews and things that you've done, and there was a clip. I think it's of you working your way up Everest, but there's this big crevice in the mountain. I don't know if
mhm.
that's the right word, and
Yeah.
you have a ladder across it, and and you're walking across, and you've got a camera. I hope it was like clipped onto your helmet and you weren't just like walking across holding a camera. And you could see you taking these slow, cautious steps across the ladder. And it may, that might not have been necessarily physically demanding, maybe from a balance perspective, but just the mental focus of like, I better take these steps very carefully. And I'm watching you and I'm looking through the lens and I'm panicking,
Yeah.
right? I know you make it obviously, but still it's like
Yeah.
uh
But
that
but like
yeah.
it's a lot of that, it's perspective, right? So for like me, those were some of the easiest parts because I can slow down. I can slow down and take my time, and they're not just like trying to get us into the next area. And I'm used to looking into the abyss, looking down. You're looking down like 8,000 foot black hole into the
Yeah.
side of the mountain. But I've done training where they essentially just drop you into the hole and you have to ascend your way back out. And so
Oh,
I've been there mentally. So for me, it's like, okay, as long as I stay right here, and that same
yeah.
thing on Denali, there's a couple sections that are very precarious, but as long as you stay in the boot track about, 8, 10 inches wide, you're good, right? Just don't go over there, don't go over there. And so, mentally, I'm good with staying on point. But a lot of people just get psyched out. There's some people that, whether from our trip or previous trips, had to go home because they just got in their head, and they just psyched themselves out of the mountain. They were fine physically, no underlying issue, and so the mental aspect, the higher you get on the mountain, the more it comes into play because you're going to feel like crap. The higher you get, you have less appetite, and it's hard to hold down food. And there were, especially right before going up for summit day, every breakfast I was puking outside the tent just because
My gosh.
it's a combination of like altitude and nerves, right? I've spent like a whole year to get ready for this point, and and so a lot of it is just staying inside your head and be like, I'm okay, this is okay, just one step after another, and slowing it down, slowing the process way down. Don't worry about tomorrow, worry about the next 10 steps.
There's such a, and you mentioned that too, how like, you have that moment in the crevice that I'm panicking watching, but you're able to look at it and think, oh, okay, I can breathe for a second, right? And you mentioned in there that you had, training specific to situations like that. Was that training? Was that like a military exercise, or was that specific
Yep.
like mountaineering training?
On Mount Rainier. So I before I went to Denali, I did a 6 day course on Rainier, and part of that is, at some point you're going to pop into a crevasse. I've been up to my waist as I fell through a snow bridge and just hanging there. It's
Gosh.
going to happen at some point, and so you train for whatever could come your way. And
Hmm.
so I'm good mentally with understanding what could happen. The only times that I've ever actually been scared, and not because I'm like that on it or whatever, but was when I was at the top of Everest. There's a very narrow area there where everybody has to pass each other.
Hmm.
There's only one rope, and to pass around each other, you have to unclip.
Oh
So you
boy.
unclip from one side, go around a person, reclip on the other, and then follow it around. But like they're failing, they're tired, they're kind of wobbly, and there's like a 7,000 foot drop on that side and a 9,000
Oops.
foot drop on that side, and it's just like, okay, yeah, that was the only time like I really had to stay like, blinders on right here, every
Yeah.
single micro movement, because like the chances are just so high at that point for things to go sideways. So,
My goodness. Yeah, that's a I played baseball growing up, and it's always called, right, game of inches, and that's
oh
a
yeah,
literal game of inches
yeah,
right there, that
yeah.
just in that moment. And it's at the no pun intended, but the peak of the
Oh
experience too,
sure,
right?
yeah,
And I like, kind of tying back to the training aspect, it's like you went through so much to prepare yourself for the whole climbing experience, that
yeah,
you were able to, in a moment that for someone that's not has had zero exposure to something like that, I'm panicking watching you, you're able to like stay calm and stay cool and collected. And I'm sure then once you got to that point where the nerves really set in, when you're, unclipping around wobbly people, you've got enough kind of mental gas in the tank left to be like, okay, now we need to dial in, because
right,
this is
yeah,
real. This is
yeah,
real precarious here.
yeah.
and
This is
and I
not
think
like theoretical anymore. This is my ass. I don't want to accidentally like bump and knock into somebody and see them tumble off the mountain. Like this is it's game time, right? So yeah,
yeah, not a drill, right? Not a drill. And I think there's like a beautiful correlation there to training, whether it's in the gym, regardless of what you're preparing for. At least like for me, with CrossFit, I like to think about it that, when I go into the gym for a workout, that's more often than not the hardest thing I'm going to have to do that day. So when I get done with that, I can walk through the rest of my day, or go through the rest of my day, and the challenges and things will come up, and I'll be like, man, okay. But I feel ready for it, because I've proven to myself in that, in the gym, that I'm capable of running into something hard and figuring out, like, all right, I'll figure it out, right? And that whole, so the way you just kind of explained that is like an embodiment of that at an extreme level. But it's the same story, right? It's you prepare yourself mentally, physically, all the different ways that you need to, because then when you get to those moments that for the everyday person that maybe hasn't come close to that experience, it'd be full on panic. You're
yeah,
like, okay, I've been here before, right?
yeah,
Maybe not this exact situation, but I've been close to this, so I know what to do. And I'm just gonna focus on the steps that I need to follow, and make it happen.
yeah. And it's same kind of thing, right? So I'd spent my wife and I went out to Colorado for 5 weeks and stayed there in Estes Park near my videographer to train together. He's my climbing partner as well, and so we went out in the snow there in March. Still plenty of snow and ice, and went out and had big days in the mountains because you have to have. There was no easy day training too. Every day I'm in the gym, whether it's on the stair stepper or with the 70-pound sandbag or whatever I'm doing. I'm getting my ass kicked on purpose. Like I'm kicking my own ass to make sure that I'm ready for the mountain, because the mountain is surely going to kick my ass. And so you've got to go there in the well, day after day after day after day, without getting burned out physically, mentally, getting injured. Right? That was my biggest concern. I'm pushing so hard. Let me make sure I don't get injured and I don't burn out, because I still have all these other big days ahead of me. So it's kind of like maintaining that balance. And like you said, game of inches. Like I watch the CrossFit Games every single year because I love seeing people at that level. And yeah, it is absolutely like over the course of the week, you got to do good on this, on the run, on the bike, on the rope climb, on da 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 da, one after another. And you may not be the leader in every category, but to wear the jersey by the end, you have to stay right there in the fight. And it is a game of inches. Those guys, ladies are running across the line like neck and neck. And even at the end of the week, and it's crazy to watch. And it's a similar kind of thing. Like I've said a couple times, like I trained an entire year over, uh, everyday training, whether it was in the gym or out on the trail or what have you, for about 20 minutes at the top of Everest, right? And then come back home safely. And so, yeah, that's a whole year pushed into 20 minutes and then make sure I come back alive. So,
Wow. Oh, goodness gracious. And yeah, it's all those little details. That's a great comparison to the CrossFit Games level athletes, right? Like the little at that level, those details matter, right?
yeah, I love watching when they're running up the rope climb and tagging the top, like just how efficient they are. Like all those little micro things, and when they're doing power cleans, making their way down the way, all those micro movements are what pushes them, just a couple millimeters, a couple inches ahead of the next competitor, and it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned rope climbs. This is a little aside. The watching someone, I've been fortunate enough to have coached a couple people to help get their first rope climb,
Mhm.
and it is kind of on a very very a lot smaller scale. It is a very similar to maybe climbing summiting a
Yeah,
mountain like that for your first time because you hit the top and you're like, holy crap, I did it. And then you look around, you're like, oh crap, I got to get back down.
yeah, yeah.
And
Getting
that's
up was
usually
one
when it's
thing,
all
but
like, all right.
rappelling back down, yeah, it's completely different.
I'm like, a 15-foot rope climb versus, 29,000 feet of Everest. Very different, right? But it's still that same experience of like, I made it. And all right, now take a deep breath. Now you got to come back down nice
Yeah.
and slowly, stay focused, right? Stay in it because you're not done yet. Like the work's not over yet. You still got to get back down here safely.
Well, I mean, it is in fact actually the same thing because like when we were going up the mountain at the foot of the Lhotse face is like a glacier that's at about 45, 50 degrees up towards Camp 4. And at the bottom of it, where the glacier meets the actual rock of the mountain, it's called a bergschrund, where there's like a moat, there's a gap because it kind of
Okay.
pulls away. So you have to climb up a rope up the wall, like vertically. And
Oh
so
my.
when we went up the first time, it was in broad daylight. And you're like, okay, I got this. I can see everything, all the footsteps, da 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 da. It's still taxing. But then when we were coming down, you had to do it in the middle of the night in complete pitch black. And you can't, you're
Oh.
looking over the side, like, I don't know where the bottom is, So you've got to wrap back down in the dark when you're like, 25 hours into the day. And so, yeah, it's a very similar feeling. So, yeah.
Wow. That's I can imagine just like, oh my God. I'm like, I get chills here in some of these stories. Like because then you start to picture, I mean, you've lived it, right? I'm just trying to picture myself in the middle of that situation. It's like pitch black, you're exhausted, you're probably hungry, all the different, and you still got to find somewhere in that to tap into something and say like, okay, we've still got work left to do, and you need to focus because the consequences, right? The consequences of something like that happening like in the gym, it's like, okay, maybe you miss that weight, like worst case scenario, you get an injury or something like that. The consequences on the side of a mountain like that are, I mean, extreme
Yeah.
to say
Yeah.
the least.
If you wrap off the end of the rope, it's game over, right? And so it's just kind of
Yeah.
like you still have to have enough mental reserve to like make sure I'm tying in correctly, and I'm following all the movements, and I'm keeping an eye out on other people too because there's other people that are worked around me, make sure they don't
Yeah.
come down on me. And so, but I mean, there's still a lot of beauty. Like one of my favorite moments of the entire trip, and it's something very simple. And Matt was down there too. We came down, we were still above Camp 2, maybe about an hour outside of camp. And one of the guys from the cook tent had brought in his backpack a bunch of Cokes. So after you've been, running hard for 24, 25 hours straight, just a Coca-Cola is like the best damn thing you've ever had in your life. And so we're sitting there on the glacier just with our headlamps, looking up at the stars, looking up the Milky Way, just sipping Cokes on the side of Everest. And like that is one of my favorite moments. And it's something like super small, but that's what makes mountaineering. Like it's not the summit. The summit's just like a goal. but it's everything along the way. And so it's super cliche, but it really is like the whole journey, because the summit was 20 minutes, right? That's like nothing.
Because that's the summit is the piece that probably everybody will ask you about.
Sure.
Uh, but it's that little moment, like sitting on the side, looking at the stars, drinking a Coke on your way back down there. It's like those are the moments that's the differentiator, right?
Yeah. Like
Like
that,
every
that's the actual reason I mountaineer, for those kind of things, like being up on the side of the mountain and looking up at the Milky Way, because you're that much closer to the sky than you are, down here in the city. Right. And
oh
so,
wow, yeah, yeah. Because I mean, especially considering like we were just saying, right? If you're climbing rappelling down a rope on a mountain face and it's pitch black, and one misstep and it's game over. An experience like the opposing experience, like sitting on the side of Everest, drinking a Coke, staring up at the stars. Is that the kind of experience that keeps you coming back to it, considering the consequences?
oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I've read all kind of like sports journals and whatever. Like the body is very good at like forgetting about pain. So you forget about all the shitty parts. You forget about how much it hurts, and how much you're like, why can't I find a different sport that doesn't kick my ass this hard, right? But it's those the small good moments that you're like, sitting in the cook tent joking, or sitting under the stars, all those kind of things that make it worthwhile. Because there's a whole lot of suck involved. Like when you're looking at Instagram reels, Instagram doesn't show like you're just completely worked and you just puked outside the tent. It doesn't show any of that part, right? So, and
yeah,
it's
it's
the
a
same,
nice the nice 30-second highlight reel of like here's
right?
the beautiful sunlight at the summit.
Right. Same. I'm about to go on the PCT, and the same thing on the AT. After 4 months on trail, like it's not sexy anymore. It's not super exciting getting up and hiking 25 miles every day through like bug infested forest, right? So like
Yeah.
there's what Instagram shows, and the reality of it's gonna suck like a lot of the time.
Oh,
So it's okay.
almost the whole time, right? Almost the
Yeah,
majority of
yeah,
the time.
yeah.
You probably haven't.
Going through Maine in the 100-mile wilderness where it rains every single day, and when it's not raining, the black flies are eating you alive. Like I came home, and my wife was like, "You look like a meth head," because my legs were just like completely chewed up by mosquitoes and black biting flies. And I was like, "Yeah,
Oh,
yeah." It's not all sexy like hiker porn. It's getting your ass kicked every day. Like
oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah. To hear you describe an experience like that, sitting on the side of Everest, staring up at the stars, it's like, yep, I can see how that would be like moments like that would be enough to keep you coming back to it, right? And then there's with the project that you're working on, that you're in the middle of, right? You've got you know the you've got another purpose behind that, right? There's for you personally, I'm sure, like being the first to achieve some and accomplish something like that is gratifying in itself, but you've also got another layer of support or reason or purpose behind that you're doing it for, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of doing fundraising for the DAV, Disabled American Veterans,
Mhm.
and trying to pay it back for my brothers and sisters in arms that are still serving, or that have served like me, and especially under the current climate and potential budget cuts to the VA. I go to the VA all the time. I'm a recipient of all that, and trying to make sure that other veterans, both current veterans and future veterans, have the support that they need coming back from the different conflicts. And after spending 20 plus years in the global war on terror, we went through the thick of things, and now want to continue to pay it forward, and kind of using my project as a vehicle to get that word out, and raise money for the
Yeah.
DAB. And so yeah, those funds raised go directly to that fundraising effort, not to me. And so making sure that as a veteran, and I'm not going to speak for all veterans because we all have a different walk, but it seems like a lot of us, I kind of understand now, some measure of what like the Vietnam veterans or Korea War veterans, kind of maybe felt, is that you come back and then everybody's kind of moved on. Well, you may not necessarily have moved on, right? There's still a lot of things that you carry with you day to day, and trying to just make sure that those folks aren't forgotten, and that they are still remembered and supported as best they possibly can be. And so I run into a lot of other veterans. It's kind of funny, when I was on the Appalachian Trail, we were up in northern, I want to say it was New Hampshire, and sitting around the table, there there were three of us retired E9s, two Navy and one Army. And, a lot of us were on the same walk. Like the first guy that did the entire Appalachian Trail had come from fighting in the Western Pacific during World War II at Earl Schaefer, and he was essentially walking off the war. And so want to just continue that measure to pay it forward for other folks, and whether it's at that personal level, just sitting across the table and talking, or fundraising efforts to get them the services provided that they need to continue moving forward.
That's amazing. That's incredible, and I'm sure very, personal to you, right? Considering your experience and your time in the military. I think you mentioned that you started to come up with the idea for the project, if not had technically or started some of it while you were still in the military. Is that right?
Yeah, I had done Denali, which is North America, Aconcagua, South America, and Kilimanjaro in Africa, all while active duty, and then climbed all over, whether in
Yeah.
Washington, Ecuador, or elsewhere in the world. Now, I'd done a couple little, day hikes and a couple day hikes on the Appalachian Trail, but kind of started fomenting this idea. My dad had always wanted to do the Appalachian Trail, but wasn't able to do it because of some physical limitations, and so it was always kind of there. And living right outside of Smoky Mountain National Park, it's right there in our backyard in Tennessee, and
Mm.
so that's kind of why I started with the AT. But yeah, I'd been kind of mulling over the idea for a while, and then when I got back from my deployment to Afghanistan, I was kind of like, hey, at some point I've got to move on from the service just for my own sake, right? I need to move beyond and start a new life after all this. And I had some other major life changes that happened at the time, and was just like, I need something else that will fulfill me. I always kind of joked about it. I served, and people that were civilians would talk about, this is my passion project. I'm like, well, yeah, my passion project is another deployment out to the Middle East, right? So, but I was kind of like, yeah, sure, whatever. But now I found myself in the position of being able to call my own shots and, make my own day. And so transitioned out of the service and just kind of found that this is what I felt pulled towards. I kind of like made a dream board while I was sitting outside my apartment one night, kind of sketching it out, and like, this could happen. Like, why not? I know other people that had done the seven summits and the poles, and like, I know them. There's nothing at all different between them and me. So why can't it be me? And I think that's just kind of the self belief. So many people don't ever go anywhere or get off the ground because they just don't believe in themselves enough to at least move in that direction. Pretty much anything I've read said you're not going to have all the answers, or even any of the answers, or any of the funding, or any of the support, but you just have to start moving in a direction, and things will come together along the way. And I found that to be true. Step by step, you will figure it out as you go if you keep aiming towards that thing. So even, now with losing five toes, like it hasn't slowed me down. I'm essentially, yeah, 4 months past my last surgery, and just finished, my first 50K back. And, I don't let those limitations limit me. I work around, I'm still going through physical therapy 3 times a week, trying to find, what my new reality is. But, I'm still pushing towards a project. I'm not letting that handicap me, in any sense. It just kind of changes how I approach certain things. And, just letting people know, like, it's okay. You're not going to have the answers. Maybe you don't have the skills, you don't come from that world. It doesn't matter. There's so many different mountaineering guides I met, like, oh, I grew up in Iowa, or I grew up in Kansas. Well, there's no mountains. There's no glaciated mountains in Kansas, right? But it's just, I want to go do that. So now they're at the top of their game doing that thing. So, you just have to move out.
And I'm not glossing over it, but I'm just gonna ask a different question first, because you mentioned, the losing your toes. We are going to come back to that. I do have some more questions. So if somebody's listening and they're like, "Hey, tell me more about," I'm like, no, I'm going to come back. You mentioned, having that belief in yourself and believing that that it was even possible, that you're like, wait a second, I think I can do this, right? Like I'm aware of some of the people that have completed parts of this. Like there's they're unbelievable in their own right, but like, if they can do it, I can do it, right? And
Yeah.
even back when we first, at the start of this conversation, you mentioned, you kind of mentioned it to, the idea of the project to another, I think it was another mountaineer that you had kind of climbed with before. And even that person told you, like, yeah, yeah, go for it. Why not? Right. I was through some of these other conversations that revolve more around like involvement in CrossFit and things like that. Right. One of the common themes that comes up is the community side. And it's almost like this having people around you that are working towards the same thing that also believe in you. And they're like, I see what you're capable of. And I believe you can do that too. How much of that, especially like just even that for, if you think back and let's say you had brought up the idea for this project to that first person and he was like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. You don't even try that, right? I mean, I don't know, maybe you would have just gone for it anyways, right?
Yeah,
But I'm
I
sure
definitely
having
would
that
have
first
like,
person.
yeah, not looking for external validation. Like I'm still going to do the stupid thing anyways, but it's nice to know like someone else might believe I'm not an idiot. So yeah.
Yeah, and so much of that is like, yes, you need to have belief in yourself to go do this thing. And if you can find people and have people in your corner that can be alongside you and say, I believe in you. This sucks. This is taking a long time and it's probably longer than you wanted it to take, but I believe that you can finish it.
Yeah.
Keep going, right? Like how much of that is helped along the way? Because this is a long journey for you
Oh yeah.
too, right?
I
This is
mean,
years.
yeah, absolutely. Now to the point, I mentioned a little bit about going to Colorado and spending time with my friend Brian, who is a co-climber. I met him on Aconcagua when I went back for my second attempt when I was finally able to summit Aconcagua. And we've climbed now in Indonesia and in Mexico and on Everest. But he's also my videographer, and he's putting together a documentary about my project and my life and so on. And so it's just kind of extrapolated out from this. He hit me up about a year and a half, 2 years ago. It's like, why don't we put together, potentially, a documentary about this? I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, right, like, I'd finished watching the movie about Nimsdai 14 Peaks, and not to compare myself to Nims because he did something that no human will ever repeat, doing all 14 8,000-meter peaks in 7 months. But
Wow.
then I got to meet him there because he's the owner operator of the company that we climbed with, and another guy, extremely capable guy, like one of a kind, but at the same time, like, yeah, we're still on the same playing field, right? And so, like, why not? What? Yes, let's put together a documentary and go and see where this thing takes us. Because again, I watch mountain movies and you name it, whatever sports documentary movie all the time, and we all come from somewhere. And so, again, same kind of thing. Like, why not me? That's not so far fetched to say, yeah, why can't that be me? It's been this and all these other people I've looked up to. So yeah, let's keep playing this thing out and see how it goes, right? So
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. Now I want to get back to your toes. Okay. So we mentioned, I think, was it 4 or 5 toes that you had to get
so,
operated on?
uh, so funny thing is, so I lost 5 toes, but 4 of them had to be operated on. So one auto amputated, meaning it essentially came off on its own.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. Okay.
and then the other four had to be cut off, which was funny, not funny enough. But when I did my first podcast interview, I actually finished the interview, and then
Mhm.
as soon as we were done, I was like, "Hey, we need to go to the hospital." And it was that day that they took me in, and the next day I was in the OR. And so
No.
because it was kind of like, "Hey, I think something is going on here." It had been about 2 months that they I essentially had like wet and then dry gangrene, which is where
Mhm.
your body essentially will, if you've ever seen this stuff, and I haven't shared too many of my own personal photos because it's a little gut wrenching, even for me, having looked at it every day. But, essentially your body will say, like, we're going to keep this and not keep this. And it starts to desiccate away like a raisin and then fall off. But it got to the
Gosh.
point where one of the toes got infected and they went in and just clear cut. So I've gotten good at my toe gang sign here. So essentially, my toes kind of look like that. The first three on the right foot, and then 1 and 3 on the left foot. And so doing a lot of work, like even last night in the gym, as I'm doing squats and deadlifts, in that right foot, since there's no big toe, just trying to like keep my foot planted as I'm, especially squatting down and keep my balance. And then of course on the 50K on Saturday this weekend, trying to refine like my right gait and not overwork my knee because I don't have the same, contact point on my right foot, and kind of work around all these things. And now that everything is healed up, now I'm in I was in the FA phase, or now I'm in the find out phase. So
I was like FA phase. I'm like, well, I'm thinking, what is that?
yeah,
And then once you said that second part, I'm like, oh,
yeah,
got it. I was
yeah,
thinking it was a
yeah.
military acronym or something.
Now I'm definitely into finding out how this works now. Whether in lifting or running or you name it. Um,
Okay.
last month, my wife and I went back to Nepal, and with one of the lead Sherpas from our expedition, and did a 115-mile hike through the Annapurna circuit. And that was kind of like my
Wow.
return, return back. Like, can I even do this? Like, I don't know if I can hike 2,600 miles on the PCT if I can't
Mm.
do 115 miles on, over 3 weeks, right? Like, it really is I believe, I think I can do this. So let's find out if that's actually possible, right? I don't want to re-injure myself or draw this out and make it worse. So I'm still kind of in that, like, slowly edging towards the deep end again of what my body is able to do. I think I can. So let's see if that's actually possible. Kind of.
Now you start just kind of like going up to goodness, bad pun incoming, right? Toe the line, right? Of like
Yeah, yeah,
of what's
right.
possible, and just start to see like, okay, let's go up to this point. Let's see. All right, we made it there, and things are okay. Let's just inch it out a little bit further. No different than what you would do in the gym, right? It's like you're
Right.
learning a new movement. Let's throw maybe a little bit of weight on. Okay, that went all right. All right, let's put a little bit more on, and just kind of work towards and continue increasing your capacity, considering now that
Yeah.
you've got different balance points like you said, right, especially for what you're trying to do, missing toes, like that'd be a very easy spot for someone to be like, yeah, okay, I think I'll throw in
Right.
the towel, and people would probably be like, yeah, that makes sense. You lost a few toes and you're trying to climb,
Yeah.
hike these trails and climb these summits. But for
But
you,
even then, like, I try to find people in similar situations. So my buddy Brian, he went out to Boulder, saw a mountain movie of one of the North Face athletes, Anna Pfaff, and was able to talk to her after the screening. And she had similar situation. She lost 5 toes from a Alaskan climb. And so I was able to reach out to Anna and, like, hey, what do you do? I see you went to Antarctica and did this climb out in the middle of, the ice cap. Like, what do you do now? And so she was able to give me some insight, from North Face athlete to this guy, of like, okay, this is what you do to continue doing the thing that you love to do, right? And so you still try to find, like, okay, there's somebody with a common experience. Let's try to see where we can take this thing. And now where I go and do physical therapy on base, the Center for the Intrepid, those folks have seen people over the last 20 years that, got blown up in roadside bombs in Iraq, Afghanistan, all these kind of things. So that I work alongside fully, like above the knee, below the knee amputations, and, carbon fiber legs, all these kind of things. And so we go every Wednesday and run together, and, other guys have leg braces, and me with my half toes. And, we try to work it out together. So it's good to be amongst common people, all moving in the same direction in our own capacity. So
awesome. That's so cool to hear. And your story, that it's an unbelievable journey that you've been on and are still on, right? I mean, I know you're halfway through now. You're kind of, I guess, now determining like, okay, how can I continue to rebuild my capacity to continue this project, right? And so to just hear the evolution of it all and how you've gotten to this point, how you're continuing to push forward for the purpose that you're doing it for, right, is just absolutely incredible. And, I've got one more question for you, but before I get to that, right, like, thank you for your service in the military. Thank you for, agreeing to come on here and share your story and share what you've been through and how you've gotten to this point. And, my last question, you've listened to the episode with Matt, so you kind of know where I go with the last question, right? It's a little bit of like a advice to your younger self, right? So if you think back to, like, the David that was, screwing around, skateboarding, running from the cops, causing trouble, right?
yeah,
And you get to sit down with him for a few minutes and even start to try and explain the things that you've now accomplished and are working on accomplishing to you at that younger age. What advice would you give him at that age, or how would you even begin to try to explain to him what you're trying to do?
yeah. Well, I mean, fortunately, I have 2 kids, and I get to bounce this off of them a little bit because, like, my son just joined the Navy last year, and I get to
Oh,
live,
awesome.
kind of like round two, through his eyes. But a similar kind of conversation I have with him, or I would have him with myself, and, like, believe that it's you, right? Believe that you belong there. You know, a lot of people, and I've read this about especially like Olympic athletes, people at the highest level, whether it's like Simone Biles, right, still have imposter syndrome. Like, do I belong here? And like, well, from the outside looking in, like, yeah, of course, you're Simone Biles. You've got like 8 million gold medals. Of course you do, right? But they still have that feeling inside, and the same kind of thing. Like I grew up with a lot of that. Like, do I belong here? I always felt like an outsider, like on the fringes, and it's all in your head. It's not reality. It's just how you perceive yourself through somebody else's eyes that you're making up on the spot, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is just believe in yourself. You belong there, and that's why I keep this on the wall. You know, man in the arena, like why not you? Just go out there, put yourself out there. Not stupidly. Don't just throw yourself out there. Nobody's just well, most smart people aren't just throwing themselves at a big mountain, right? It does happen, but like do your research, but like take the long approach. You belong there, take the long approach. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's still going to happen, you know. And just yeah, push I say this all the time and just push the I believe button, you know. At some point it will come around. Just keep paying it forward and eventually it's going to play out for you. So, yeah.
I love that. We need to put that on a bumper sticker. You know what we need to do? David, if you don't have this on your website, I'm just throwing ideas here for you.
Yeah.
You need to like make an I believe button. You know those little ones that like people keep on their desk, right? Just actually create it. Like the amount of people that I think would go for that. I know I would.
Yeah. Well, I do it. Yeah, I have my online store. Maybe I can find somebody, well, Timu or whoever that can make them for me. So yeah.
Just
but yeah, it's literally like every
I believe.
Yeah, every day you wake up before you get out of bed, you just slap that thing 520 times, and you're like, okay,
that's right. Yeah, just that little reminder for yourself. So no, and that's such a cool message and a great way to wrap this up. Where can people find you, find out more about the project? I know you have the website. You mentioned there's a documentary in the works. What's the best way for people to, you know, find out more about the project, follow along with the journey, and, you know, donate as well? I know you're, you know, fundraising for the DAV, so want to make sure people have access to help out.
Yeah, so the easiest way to find me is, go to the website, www.grandexplorerscrown.com, Grand Explorers Crown. And from that, it has all my social media, all the TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. And then also our documentary page through Happy Camp Media. And so that people can kind of follow the project and the documentary as it comes along. We're looking down the road at different venues. They just moved Sundance to Boulder, so that's like the grand,
nice.
and you know that since it's right around the corner at some point, like yeah, let's get on Sundance because again, kind of that I believe, like why not? Like sure, yeah, let's see what happens.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Oh, amazing.
Yeah. Yep.
And is there links to donate there as well, or
Yes.
from the fundraising side? Okay, cool,
Yep.
perfect.
There's
Want to make sure
a
that's all
hanging
there.
point there. You can donate directly to DAV. None of it goes to me. Directly on Disabled American Veterans website. And yeah.
Amazing, awesome. Is there anything else? Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you thought I would, or any other parting words for the listeners?
Oh, yeah. Don't get stage 4 frostbite. It's not fun.
that's a bumper sticker on the website
exactly.
now. Yeah, see, we're just coming up with all new merchandise ideas.
Yeah,
Right now.
it's less exciting than you think it is.
Oh, amazing, David! Thank you so much for the time. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for your service too. Appreciate having you on.
All right, thanks. Take care.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing with a friend. To get notified of future episodes, please follow the show on your favorite podcast app so you can continue to hear these stories. For more behind-the-scenes content of everyday CrossFitters, follow on YouTube and Instagram at Silverback Media. Until next time, this has been the Silverback Media Podcast.